Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is a general guide to co-abilities and chain co-abilities. I'll first explain how co-abilities work in general, then we'll move on to discuss which ones are worthwhile investments. Let's start by defining co-abilities and chain co-abilities. Co-abilities are basically passive effects that apply to your entire team. These do not stack, meaning if two members of your team have the same co-ability, only the one with the highest percent value will apply. Chain co-abilities are just like regular co-abilities, except they do stack, and they're usually restricted so that they only apply to same element teammates. Only the first 5 story characters from the campaign have chain co-abilities that aren't element locked. Every adventurer has exactly one co-ability and one chain co-ability. These can be powered up simultaneously by using Eldwater, up to 4 times by unlocking 4 nodes from the 5th floor of a unit's mana circles. The first co-ability and chain co-ability upgrade node costs 6,000 Eldwater, the second node costs 12,000 Eldwater, the third node costs 20,000 Eldwater, and the fourth and final node costs 35,000 Eldwater. The price is steep, which is why it's important to exercise caution in deciding which units to prioritize. To this day, co-abilities are often tied to an adventurer's weapon type, and prior to the first anniversary, this was universally true. For this reason, sometimes more experienced players will interchange weapon types and co-ability effects. For example, if someone says you should include a blade on your team, what they mean is that you should include the plus 10% strength co-ability commonly found on blade adventurers. The traditional max co-abilities are strength plus 10% for blades, skill damage plus 15% for wands, dragon haste plus 15% for swords, defense plus 15% for axes, HP plus 15% for lances, critical rates plus 10% for daggers, skill haste plus 15% for bows, and finally recovery potency plus 20% for staff units. These are still the predominant co-abilities most adventurers in Dragalia Lost tend to have, and anything besides these is considered rare or unusual. In fact, less than a dozen adventurers in Dragalia have non-traditional co-abilities at the time of recording. Chain co-abilities, unlike regular co-abilities, tend to be much more diverse in the range of their effects. Whether an adventurer is a 3, 4, or 5 star, their co-abilities will all still converge to the same max value. Although natural 3 and 4 star units start off with worse co-ability percent values than do 5 star adventurers. Chain co-abilities do not work in this same way. 5 star units' chain co-abilities remain more powerful than the versions seen on 3 and 4 stars, even when fully maxed out. That being said, adventurers have no way to change their own co-ability and chain pair. So it's sort of a package deal what each adventurer happens to have and what they'd offer as a backliner on your team. This means sometimes 3 and 4 stars can offer valuable ability pairings simply because their co-ability and chain co-ability combos aren't yet available at a 5-star rarity. The minimum mana nodes needed to max out an adventurer's co-abilities is 44 nodes, but at that point it's often worth upgrading the adventurer to 50 nodes or beyond if they're a powerful unit in their own right, or if they have a shared skill you want to grab anyway. This is because the Eldwater you've spent is already one of the highest costs toward fully building a unit, perhaps aside from Champion's Testaments. So, a background consideration when we talk about investing in certain co-abilities or chain co-abilities is always how good the adventurer is to begin with, and the types of other benefits you could get from them. For single player and raids in particular, all 4 units on your team enter quests, so a major determinant of your team's effectiveness is not just their co-abilities and chain co-abilities, but the localized aspects of each adventurer like their skills and personal abilities. While co-abilities and chain co-abilities are relevant here, especially for tight auto clears, the main consideration tends to be the units themselves. In regular co-op, you have a lot more flexibility to customize which co-abilities and chain co-abilities you want your team leader to receive. The team leader is the unit in the first slot on a team, and in a typical 4-player lobby, they'll be the only one to enter a co-op battle. Yet despite being the only one who appears from your team page in co-op, the other 3 adventurers you set on the team page matter. In fact, this is perhaps the most critical takeaway from this video. It's your own team leader plus the other 3 adventurers on your own team page who may never even enter the co-op fight that dictate which co-abilities and chain co-abilities your leader receives. What other players are doing does not affect you. This is a fairly recent change first announced during the game's 1.5-year anniversary. Since I've seen a lot of confusion around this, I'll reiterate it one more time. It's you who determines what your own co-abilities and chain co-abilities are, not any other player. This applies to all modes within Dragalia Lost. In your typical 4-player co-op match, that means you have 1 team leader who will enter a quest and 3 team backliners who won't enter battle but still apply their co-abilities and chain co-abilities onto your team lead. Some regular abilities also apply from the back line, like player EXP event perks, and the rupee intake, mana intake, and adventure EXP abilities on gold, silver, and bronze Fafnirs respectively. The rest of this video will focus in on what units to invest in to best fill those 3 backline team slots. Whether or not you include Yuden, you'll have at least a couple of slots to fill besides your team leader. What's best varies a lot by lead character, and limitations aside, the custom DPS simulator can help you pick who to use. It's clear even from its creator's remarks that the custom sim should not be seen as gospel, and like with any model, its external validity hinges on some assumptions. But I still find this to be a solid Dragalia DPS approximation. Select the lead unit you wish to sim, then experiment to see which backliners maximize your leader's DPS. I'll share a link to the custom simulator in the description below. That's probably the closest we can come to a scientific approach for right now, given the significant variety across adventurers as far as their optimal setups. But one thing to keep in mind is that the other constraints in this optimization problem will necessarily make your decisions easier in reality. When I refer to other constraints here, I'm talking about access to adventurers and access to the Eldwater to actually use their fully upgraded co-abilities and chain co-abilities. For many players, those will be the limiting reagents that bind their hand, so it's almost never a question of total optimization in a vacuum. Instead, it's more like, out of every unit I have built, which 2 or 3 backliners do I want here? And relatedly, which units should I build for the primary reason that they'd be relatively solid backliners for a variety of adventurers, even if they aren't necessarily the optimal selection for any single one of them? And, well, that's what we're going to try answer now. Which co-abilities and chain co-abilities are worth investing in and why? Which co-abilities and chain co-abilities are worth maxing out first? Let's start with the Blade co-ability of plus 10% strength. This is my pick for the best co-ability in the game because it provides a flat 10% DPS gain with how damage works in Dragalia Lost. Blades are excellent early investments, and when in doubt, they're a relatively safe backline choice. Think of the chain co-abilities on Blade units as more of a tiebreaker when deciding who to invest in, or the cherry on top, if you will. With this mindset, the 2 best blades to spend Eldwater on are Nobunaga and Ieyasu. Nobunaga has combo time plus 2.5 seconds for flame units as her chain co-ability, and Ieyasu has dragon haste plus 20% for shadow units. Neither chain ability is necessarily outstanding, but they're about as good as we can get when paired with the amazing Blade co-ability. And with these both being 5 stars, they don't risk power creep on their chain co-ability at all. By this, I mean a 4-star always runs a risk that a future 5-star will have their same co-ability and chain pair, just with higher percentages, but 5 stars don't have that same investment risk. My runner-up picks are Victor, Valerio, and Galaluka, all of whom have purely defensive chain co-abilities instead. Summer Ronzel, Hanabusa, and Taro are just a tad below all of these for me due to their lower rarities. After the Blade, Juan's skill damage plus 15% co-ability is probably second best. This grants a 15% DPS gain on skills, which tend to represent the bulk of damage for lots of adventurers in Dragalia Lost. If 2/3 of an adventurer's DPS comes from skills, then the Wand's co-ability is actually more beneficial than the Blade's. but for many adventurers, buff bots and healers aside, it's totally fine to backline both a blade and a wand. And of course, there are a few other exceptions, like units whose DPS comes mainly from basic attacks or force strikes. But just like with blades, we'll use chain co-abilities here more as tiebreakers to decide which wands are the best backliners. At 5-star, Urias and Lucretia have the best chain co-abilities in the form of Dragon Haste plus 20% for water units and Energy equals Inspiration for light units, respectively. Neither is fantastic, but as bonuses on top of the skill damage co-ability, both are admirable. Since Urias and Lucretia aren't so hot outside the backline, my runners-up here are Veronica, Gala Cleo, and Radiant Xuan Song, all of whom are better in battle but have defensive chain co-abilities. Dragalia Zanfried is also amazing at 4-star, and he's probably the best backliner for Wind thanks to his Dragon Claw's chain ability paired with the skill damage co-ability. Summer Estelle is another terrific 4-star since her chain is buff skill time. The question is whether you're comfortable with the possibility that new 5-star units may release and end up strictly better backliners than either of these units. That's what happened to Pipple after all, another good 4-star wand whose role in the backline got usurped by Urias. But Dragalia Zanfried in particular seems so strong to me that it's hard to see him being surpassed soon. The third best common co-ability is probably Dagger's critical rates of plus 10%. As with wands and blades, the Dagger co-ability does not suffer from diminishing returns. In fact, critical rates below 100% never do. Critical hits in Dragalia Lost deal 1.7 times the amount of damage as normal hits, meaning the plus 10% crit rate translates to a 7% DPS increase on average. If the adventurer you're looking at has some built-in critical damage abilities, Wormprints or Dragons, then the critical rate gets better. At 30% extra critical damage, the critical rate co-ability breaks exactly even with the typical blade co-ability's pure 10% DPS increase. Some of the best daggers to invest in as backliners are Ezzelith, Mitsuhide, and Dragalia Cleo. All three have buff time plus 2.5 seconds for their respective elements, an ability quite relevant for all three of these units, not to mention across the board for any units who want to maintain flurry or combo effects. Delphi is another one of the best 5-star choices thanks to his Poison Edge, which helps with poison uptime. And if you're newer to Dragalia, there's definitely no shame in using Wukong if you maxed him out during his event. At 4-star, the standout dagger backliners are Yuya with his Dragon Haste chain, and Renee with buff skill time. The former is good for dragon-centric flame units, and the latter is excellent for mini water buff bots. These three co-abilities, Blade, Wand, and Dagger, stand on their own without the need of a chain co-ability to really push them over the top. After these, I'd suggest investing in more elusive co-abilities like Peony's light damage, Tobias's buff time, and Sharina's paralyzed Punisher, to name just a few. Rarer co-abilities like these almost always have at least one home, or the unit they're on happens to be strong. Peony, Mega Man, Tobias, Sharina, Halloween Mim, Tiki, Grace, Crom, and Gala Leaf all fit this mold. Some of them also come with relevant chain co-abilities like those on Sharina, Halloween Mim, and Tiki. Among the rare and unusual co-abilities, it's mainly Gala Yuden and Valentine's Melody that I'd say are slightly weaker. Then we come to the other classic co-abilities found on the rest of the weapon types. The next best co-ability from a DPS standpoint is Bow's Skill Haste, followed by Sword's Dragon Haste. And the last three traditional co-abilities, Defense, HP, and Recovery Potency, will likely have no direct effect on DPS at all. DPS isn't the be-all end-all, but quite frankly, in the current environment, it matters a lot more than Sustain. Fortunately, chain co-abilities are sort of distributed in such a way that weaker co-abilities tend to get better chains. So, for the rest of this video, we'll focus on some of the best DPS-oriented chain co-abilities organized by typing. These include Dragon's Claws, hits equals strength or critical rates, affliction equals strength or critical rates, and HP 40% equals strength. Notably, all of these chain co-abilities are conditional in nature, whereas traditional co-abilities are not. Furthermore, most chain co-abilities grant their effects through visible strength buff icons, for which diminishing returns are a factor. But before we get into those, I'll give an honorable mention to the Combo Time and Dragon Haste chain co-abilities we've already seen so far. Those are both great chain co-abilities when thought of as an added bonus to an already good co-ability, but they're seldom the main draw to why you'd backline a particular unit. The same is sometimes true of Buff Skill Time, which for buff bots is the main draw, but not for other types of adventurers. Similarly, Affliction Edge and Energy co-abilities seen on a few bow units are the type of solid chain co-abilities that are a nice added bonus if you already want skill haste. But with that out of the way, let's get into the really good stuff. We'll start with Dragon's Claws. This is especially good for dragon-centric adventurers, but more broadly, it's still rather powerful in longer fights. Galamim, Zanefried, Summerseliera, and Forte have the 5-star Dragon's Claws variant, Verica and Dragonyule Zanefried have the 4-star variant, and Story Cleo has a 3-star equivalent that's not locked to any specific element. The 5-star variant of this chain co-ability gives 10% strength on the first shapeshift, 20% total on the second, and 35% total on the third, permanently for the rest of the quest. The fact that chain co-abilities stack together, plus some Wyrmprints and adventurers have Dragon's Claws abilities already, can lead to very large strength bonuses from this. For example, Zanefried can obtain a 172% total strength buff after his third transformation by combining his chain, Summerseliera's, Cleo's, his inherent Dragon Claws ability, and using a Wyrmprint with Dragon's Claws like the Red Impulse. The question to ask yourself is whether the quest you're doing lasts long enough that multiple shapeshifts are possible. The Dragon's Claws chain co-ability isn't really worth using if you only shapeshift once in the whole quest. If you shapeshift twice, it starts to become a consideration depending on how soon you can transform. The next chain co-ability worth mentioning is HP 40% equals strength. This one caps out at 15% strength whenever your HP is at or below 40%, making it excellent for adventurers who want to stay at low HP. The main problem with this chain co-ability is that in co-op settings, you sometimes can't control how low your HP goes due to the presence of other players whose skills may or may not involve healing. This chain is much stronger for solo play than it is for co-op, but a 15% buff is still strong enough that I felt it worth mentioning here. Notable holders of this chain are Curran and Berserker in Shadow, and Valentine's Hildegard, Yue, and Emma in Flame, with 15% on the 5 stars and 14% for the 4 stars. Curran and Berserker stand out among the rest because lots of Shadow units like to operate at low HP. Valentine's Hildegard, on the other hand, is kind of self-defeating since she'll heal low HP units in solo. There's another chain co-ability that grants unit strength when above 60% HP. This condition is easier to meet, but the bonus is only 6% strength, so I generally don't consider this a worthwhile investment. The same could be said of any of the double buff or energy related chain co-abilities. They're almost never going to be better than a regular old blade, wand, or dagger, except when the adventurer already had a good co-ability to begin with, like say Gala Leaf or Lucretia. Other chain co-abilities that don't really have a good niche right now are ones that grant elemental resistance, defense, HP, shields, and regen, unless you're leading with a healer or a vulnerable ranged unit and have a very specific survival setup in mind. Next up, let's talk about hits equals strength plus 13%. This chain co-ability is pretty good, but right on the border of making the cut or not. This chain is found on the 5 stars Marth, Linyu, Xander, and Halloween Elisan. The 4-star variant only gives plus 10% strength when you have a 10-hit combo or more, making it not good enough in my opinion. The thing to remember here is that chain co-abilities grant visible buffs, which suffer from diminishing returns. So if you already have, say, 30% strength buffs in a quest, then the hits equal strength plus 13% really only amounts to a 10% DPS increase on par with the blade co-ability. Due to the abundance of buffs from things like skill sharing, Agito weapons, Dragon's Claws, and so on, the actual benefit of these chains will be lower than a 13% DPS gain most of the time, probably even lower than a 10% gain. The hits equals critical rate chain co-abilities found on 4-star and 5-star adventurers, in contrast, are actually very, very good. This is because critical rate doesn't suffer from diminishing returns whatsoever, except past 100%. So getting 12% critical rates on flame units off Serena when your combo count is 10 or more is actually just better than a dagger co-ability, or it could even be run alongside a dagger for a 22% critical rate increase total. Likewise, Akasha gives 13% extra critical rates for wind units. So if you just wanted to backline a dagger and can keep combo, you may strongly want to consider backlining Akasha in that slot instead. And that leaves us with Affliction equals Strength and Affliction equals Critical Rate to end things off. These chain co-abilities are fascinating because in principle, they look fantastic, but in practice, I think they may not be. How they work is that whenever you cause an Affliction, you get up to a 13% Strength or Critical Rates buff, which lasts for 15 seconds, and the chain co-ability won't trigger again for 10 seconds. This means there's actually a 5-second window where you can double up on the chain co-ability effect if you afflict a foe. With the best possible uptime, that could mean 10 seconds of a 13% boost, alternating with 5 seconds of a 26% boost, until roughly 205 seconds into a quest, at which time you'd exhaust the max cap on the affliction. That's with perfect sequencing and assuming none of your attempts to cause the affliction get resisted. The main problem I see with these chains is that afflictions are oversaturated in most of today's co-op meta. There's seldom one affliction enabler. Instead, 3 or 4 units may all have affliction-inducing skills, often building up a boss's tolerance to an affliction very rapidly. The boss's resistance goes up by 5% for most common afflictions every time the boss is afflicted, and it's not easy to reset this. Only Radiant Xuansong or mechanics like Volk's Plague can really offset this affliction resistance build up by boss enemies. Outside of Light, I think these affliction chains are weakened considerably the longer a quest goes on, but powerful in short bursts. They're sort of the opposite of the Dragon's Claws chain in this sense. This, plus the whole affliction immunity building up over time, makes me think these chain co-abilities work much better in pre-made groups than in random public lobbies. They're still a bit precarious even in single-player team comps because many of the chain's holders compete for affliction procs themselves. Notable holders of chain co-abilities of this type are Albert and Hunter Vanessa with plus 13% critical rate whenever a light unit causes paralysis, Dragalia Malura and Sharina with plus 13% strength whenever a light unit causes paralysis, Silas with plus 13% strength whenever a wind unit causes poison, Gala Alex and Heinwald with plus 13% strength whenever a shadow unit causes poison, and Lazari and Fjorm with plus 13% strength whenever a water unit causes frostbite. There are also some 4 and 3-star variants of these chains. It's fun to imagine a light team where you lead Sharina and backline Albert, Hunter Vanessa, and Dragalia Malura. Every paralysis, if spaced out properly, would mean a plus 26% strength buff and a plus 26% critical rate buff. Sometimes, for 5-second bursts, you could even double that to plus 52% strength and plus 52% critical rates. The possibilities are exciting, but you'd need to be in a co-op setting where you're the only paralysis enabler or Radiant Xuansong is present to really make this work. And even then, you'd be left wondering if something simpler like Peony in your backline composition might not simply be better. So ultimately, I feel like these affliction chain co-abilities are worth considering, but not ahead of some of the more obvious co-ability and chain picks in my view. And, well, that's a nice way to close this video. A reminder that this guide really represents just my view on things and how I personally judge and determine which co-abilities and chain co-abilities I think are the best and safest investments. As mentioned earlier, there's tools available for a more scientific take on the matter, but I do feel that for lots of players, the decision doesn't always come down to what's optimal so much as it does what's available. I believe it's best to start by keeping things simple with blades, wands, and daggers, then branch out into the unique co-abilities, then pick up and play around with some of the more powerful chain co-abilities, whether or not they're paired with a strong regular co-ability. In any case, I'd love to hear any further thoughts you have on co-abilities and chain co-abilities in the comments below. Otherwise, everyone, that is going to do it for this video. Thank you as always for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.